Hello and welcome to Off My Shelves, and this is a look at Safe Area Goražde by Joe Sacco, the hardback special edition, and we will get underway. Joe Sacco is an amazingly talented journalist and cartoonist, and he slams those two things together to tell really impactful, interesting and educational stories from real life. They're non-fiction stories. I don't think he's ever done a fiction story as far as I'm aware. And this book follows what's loosely known as the Bosnian War, but it's looking at a place called Goražde in Bosnia that was earmarked as a safe area by the United Nations, and the trials and tribulations of that community during the Bosnian War between like 1992 and 95, and then the aftermath. But before I get too far into the story, look at the build of this book. Now this is the special edition version. It is a second-hand book, so it is a bit beat up, ex-library copy. There are many different versions of this out over the years. I think it's been printed more often than not in paperback. This version comes with a hell of a lot of extras at the start and at the end, but a lot of photo reference, a lot of journal extracts, a lot of information. It's sewn binding with a cloth spine and a kind of metallic inlay on the front with a foiled title. So the book starts off with Joe entering the safe area, and what he hopes to achieve by going here is a sense of what happened during the conflict, a sense of what the people experienced. So he goes in the end of 1995 when the conflict had come to a close to some extent, and he interviews people, and basically this book is the story of his interviews and his experiences going there in 1995. Now, Serbian forces were attacking Bosnia, and essentially they were targeting a lot of Muslims that existed in the area at that point, because it was a former Ottoman ruled area for many years, and so there was a high percentage of Muslim Bosniaks, I think, or Bosnians. It's one or the other. I think it might be Bosniaks, but excuse me if I'm wrong. But either way, they were targeted massively, and there's lots of stories of ethnic cleansing going on, lots of stories about persecution, about rape, about warfare, about targeting civilian populations with bombs and missiles and machine guns. But why Goražde? Because Goražde was earmarked by the UN as a safe area. They tried to negotiate certain areas that it was a safe place to go away from the conflict, but those borders were ignored by Serb forces for the most part, and so a safe area became a kind of place that people could come and take you out indiscriminately, it seems. But either way, the UN itself kind of didn't even really know how to define the safe area and how to keep the peace there and things like that. And so you get a brilliant indication, first and foremost, of the happiness and the joy of the possibility of the conflict coming to an end when Joe first comes into the area, because people have just been subjected to the most horrific things over many years now, and so they were just joyous, smoking, drinking, singing, dancing, overjoyed for the possibility of the conflict coming to an end. And the fact that American journalists were allowed in the country shows that they were, on the right side of the conflict. But what the book does exceptionally well, because Joe Sacco is such a good artist, is it expertly captures the state of the town, the state of the building, the walkways, the pathways, the cars, the structures, the clothes that people are wearing. So it really gives you a full insight into how it all looked. But with Joe Sacco's natural kind of cartoon instincts, a lot of the people are more kind of cartoon-esque, if you want to put it like that, caricature-esque, but then the actual kind of buildings and the landscape are painstakingly recreated in this book. To be fair, it must have taken forever, but I say that about all Joe Sacco books. There is a heavy amount of exposition to get into, and a heavy amount of eyewitness accounts of what happened in that conflict. And so the way he does that is so well done in this book. The pages go starkly black instead of white border. So the black borders indicate straight away that you go in pre-95, essentially. You go into the backstory. And so whenever those black borders come in, you get in the story of before Joe arrived. But then whenever you've got the white borders, you're essentially following Joe through the town, talking to people, and the way it's separated up like that is great, and it makes the story flow really well. I would say that for me, growing up in the 90s, this was always a kind of shadow in the 90s, like the Gulf War and things like that. I always knew of it and knew bits of it and knew like the main players, but in terms of details I knew very little, and this book was an education in terms of how the conflict started, the different factions that were involved, the events that happened during it. Joe Sacco early on as well latches onto a teacher, Edin, and Edin is really his pathway into all the different people in the community, and so he introduces him to a lot of different people who have those stories of the conflicts of various things, and he really is a mine of information, and his own personal experiences feature heavily in this book. Him having to go out and find food for his family through rugged terrain non-stop, you know, in exceptionally terrible conditions, to be fair, and threatening conditions. Him being a soldier, being roped in to protect the area and the town and being injured. And so his journey from a school teacher, which is what he was before the conflict broke out, through that part of time is really one of the main threads of the book, and he comes across as such a kind, loving and interesting person, as do many people in this book. But yeah, being a journalist, Joe Sacco goes to painstaking lengths as well to make sure that what he's telling and what the story he's telling is backed up, so he doesn't just take a story of someone and then reprint it. He'll make sure that there's some kind of grounding of reality to that story before he then includes it in his book. And yet the ingenuity and the creativity of people living in this little area is astounding as well, because they found it difficult to get food, found it difficult to get electric, found it difficult to heat their homes and all that type of thing, but they kind of found ways. Obviously there was lots of poverty, there was hunger, there was different things going on, but they kind of were really ingenious in how they approached certain things and really back to basics type of attitude, and lots of people pulled together. And so this book does an amazing job of showcasing how people had that kind of spirit of ingenuity and community and going forward, really. It goes without saying, obviously, that the stories depicted and the stories kind of imparted by this book, particularly the Black Border parts, really are quite intense, and it's warfare at the end of the day. It's ethnic cleansing, it's millions of people being displaced from their homes, it's mothers losing their children, it's women being raped and killed, it's men having to walk through miles and miles of rough, rugged, cold landscape just to try and get some kind of flour and sugar for their homes back in Goražde. So it's not an easy read on many levels, but it is such a well crafted book, and it is such an expert look on this conflict, really. Certainly is from one perspective, the people of Goražde, which it should be because it's their story essentially. It really does shine a massive light on this period of time. You really feel the humanity and you empathise with many of the characters in you. Obviously there's many you don't, but the ones you do, they kind of stay with you and you really want the best for their future. And so when you read about their past and their trials and tribulations, it makes it more difficult because you actually like the people, which is why when it's placed like this, where you were modern 1995 going back to 92 and 93 and 94, makes it more impactful, really, because you see in these guys after the conflict, you're getting familiar with them and then you see them go through that, so it feels harsher and it hits home more because you've got time to be familiar with that character outside of warfare. If they just introduced these characters smack dab in the middle of this war, you wouldn't have felt as much empathy and as much emotion around it. And so the way the book is paced and the way the book is laid out really makes the most of that, I think, and really layers the personal stories of this conflict in a really, really impactful way. But yeah, if you want to know more about the Bosnian War, about all this time period in world history, this is a fantastic place to start because it gives it to you visually, gives it to you accurately, and you get such an idea as to how the town is made, how the town got to where it is, and where it's going after. But anyway, that's all I got to say on Safe Area Goražde. It is well worth a read, I think, on every level. So thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.